In a luxurious boardroom at the top of a corporate skyscraper, a poor kid is humiliated in front of a room full of bored tycoons. But what no one expected was that this kid was holding a secret that could turn the tables completely. What he does next dismantles their power, reveals hidden truths, and starts a silent revolution. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you are watching us from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever hear in your life. The winter sun streamed through the windows of the 42nd floor of the Pinnacle Tower in the heart of Park Avenue, New York City. The golden afternoon light reflected off the Italian marble that lined the floor, creating a play of shadows over the European designer furniture scattered throughout the boardroom. That was one of the most exclusive floors in the tower, reserved only for the highest-ranking executives of Sterling Global Holdings, a business empire that dominated sectors ranging from construction to the financial market. On that cold January afternoon, 6 men occupied the genuine leather armchairs around the tempered glass table. They were the majority partners, the owners of decisions that moved billions of dollars every month. Amidst imported cigars and glasses of 50-year-old Scotch whiskey, they talked about acquisitions, mergers, and numbers that for most people would be nothing more than fiction. The air conditioning kept the temperature pleasant, while down below, in the streets, the city bustled under a rare winter heat wave. Robert Sterling, the patriarch of the group and founder of the holding company, was 63 years old and had a presence that filled any room. Tall, with grey hair slicked back, wearing an impeccable charcoal Italian suit, his posture combined elegance with arrogance. His small, piercing eyes seemed to calculate every word and every gesture, as if every interaction were a commercial transaction. He had built his empire from scratch, as he liked to repeat, although everyone knew that his father-in-law's inheritance had provided the initial kickstart decades ago. But that was a detail Robert preferred to omit from his self-made man narrative. Sitting to his right was Maurice Miller, a real estate mogul who made a point of flaunting the solid gold watch on his left wrist with every movement. To his left was Gerald Foster, a financial market investor known for his coldness in negotiations and for collecting bankrupt companies that he bought for pennies and sold for fortunes. The other 3 completed the power group, men in their 50s and 60s, all wearing suits that cost more than a mid-range car, all accustomed to having the world bowed at their feet. The meeting followed its predictable course between profit reports and projections for the next quarter, when the side door of the room opened discreetly. It was Mary Sullivan, one of the employees from the building's cleaning crew. She was 38 years old, but looked older. Exhaustion was marked in her delicate features, in her brown eyes that no longer sparkled as they once did, and in her hands, calloused by hard work. She wore the navy blue uniform of the outsourced services company, with her name embroidered on the left pocket. Her dark hair was tied in a simple bun, and she carried a discreet cleaning cart with her. Beside her, holding her hand, was Luke. The boy was 9 years old, thin, with sun-kissed skin, messy black hair, and large, attentive eyes that seemed to absorb every detail around him. He wore a faded New York Yankees t-shirt, frayed shorts, and old sneakers with the sole already peeling off at one of the tips. He was not wearing socks. His small hands held firmly to his mother's hand, but his eyes scanned the room with silent curiosity. Mary had been forced to take her son to work that day. His school was on recess due to an emergency roof repair, and she had no one to leave Luke with. The neighbor who usually looked after him had traveled, and Mary's salary did not allow her to pay for a babysitter, let alone miss work. She tried to be as discreet as possible, entering through the service door and avoiding the main corridors, but she needed to clean that room, and there was no way to postpone it. When the door opened, the conversation ceased immediately. 6 pairs of eyes turned toward the woman and the boy, the silence that settled in. The room had an almost physical weight. Mary felt the blood run cold in her veins. She knew she shouldn't be there at that moment, much less with a child, but she had no choice. "Forgive me, Mr. Sterling," she said with a trembling voice, giving a slight bow of her head. "I just came to clear the coffee trays and I'll be right out. I won't get in the way." Robert Sterling leaned back in his armchair, crossing his arms over his chest. A smirk appeared on his face, but it wasn't a kind smile. It was the kind, have smile that precedes a humiliation. He looked at his companions around the table as if seeking complicity, and they all got the message. This was going to be a moment of entertainment. "Get in the way," Robert said in a slow, almost theatrical voice. "On the contrary, Mary, you and your companion here have brought us a very welcome distraction. After all, we were talking about numbers, and more numbers. A bit of reality is good for us, isn't it?" The other men laughed softly, a restrained laugh but one loaded with sarcasm. Mary felt her cheeks burn. Luke squeezed his mother's hand even harder but remained silent, observing. Come closer," Robert said, making a gesture with his hand as if inviting someone onto a stage. "No need to be shy. We are all relaxed here among friends. What is the boy's name?" Mary hesitated. Every fiber of her body screamed for her to take Luke and run out of there, but she knew she couldn't. She couldn't lose that job. It was all she had. So she swallowed her pride and answered with the firmest voice she could manage. "Luke, sir, my son's name is Luke." "Luke," Robert repeated, savoring the name like someone tasting a wine. "A good name, strong. And tell me, Luke, do you know where your mother works?" Luke looked at his mother, who made an almost imperceptible gesture with her head, authorizing him to answer. The boy then raised his chin and spoke with a clarity that surprised everyone. "Yes, sir. She works here in this building. She cleans." The businessmen exchanged glances. Maurice Miller let out a short laugh. "What a polite boy," he commented. "Rare these days, isn't it?" Robert stood up from his chair and walked slowly to the center of the room. His Italian leather shoes clicked on the marble floor with a dry rhythmic sound. He stopped in front of an imposing structure that occupied a corner of the room. It was a state-of-the-art Swiss safe, a colossus of titanium and military technology. It was nearly 7 feet tall with a polished mirrored surface and a sophisticated digital panel on the door. That safe was not just a vault, it was a symbol of status, power, and invulnerability. Robert tapped his knuckles lightly on the metallic surface, producing a hollow, deep sound. "Do you know what this is, Luke?" he asked, turning to the boy. Luke took a few steps forward, letting go of his mother's hand for the first time. His eyes scanned the structure of the safe with an attention that went beyond childish curiosity. He seemed to be analyzing every detail, every line, every number. "It's a safe, sir." "Very good," Robert exclaimed with false enthusiasm, clapping his hands twice. "But it's not just any safe, my young man. This is a model manufactured in Switzerland with cutting-edge technology. It has rotating codes, biometric authentication, and an alarm system connected directly to building security and the police. Inside it there are documents worth more than you could imagine. Contracts, certificates, money, a lot of money." He made a dramatic pause, looking around to make sure everyone was paying attention to the show that was about to begin. "And do you know how much everything inside here is worth, Luke?" Robert asked, leaning forward slightly as if he were about to reveal a great secret. Luke shook his head. $100 million, Robert said, opening his arms in a theatrical gesture. "It might seem crazy to you, but it's the truth. 100 million. That's more money than your mother would earn working here for, let me see, about 500 years, maybe 600. Laughter exploded in the room. Mary felt her legs weaken. She wanted to scream. She wanted to pull Luke away and run, but she was paralyzed by humiliation and fear. Tears began to form in her eyes, but she held them back with all her strength. Robert continued, now completely committed to the role of the cruel showman. "So here is my proposal, Luke. A serious proposal from a real businessman. If you can open this safe, all that money is yours, 100 million. You and your mother will never have to worry about anything in life again. You can buy a house, a car, travel the world. What do you think?" The silence that followed was even heavier than the previous one. Everyone in the room knew that wasn't a real offer. It was a refined provocation, a way to rub in the child's and the mother's faces, the insurmountable distance that separated their worlds. It was cruelty disguised as generosity. Gerald Foster cleared his throat and commented aloud so everyone could hear, "Of course the boy can try. After all, it will be fun to see a kid from the projects trying to crack Swiss technology, won't it? Maybe he thinks it's like Netflix and tries to enter a password like 1234. The laughter was loud and disrespectful. Maurice added, or maybe he thinks he just has to kick it to open it like they do in the movies. More laughter. Mary couldn't take it anymore. She took a step forward, her eyes now moist and her voice choked. Mr. Sterling, please. We are leaving. Sorry for any inconvenience. Luke, come here, son. She reached out, her hand, but before she could grab her son, Robert raised his hand in an authoritative gesture. No, Mary, calm down. We aren't finished here. I made a serious proposal to the boy. It would be impolite of me to withdraw the offer now, don't you think? He has the right to try. Robert walked over to Mary and stopped right in front of her, invading her personal space in an intimidating way. In fact, since we are talking about money, tell me something, Mary. How much do you earn a month working here? Mary felt the ground open beneath her feet. She knew where this was going. She knew that type of man well, that type of game. But she had no choice. $2,500, sir, she replied, in a voice that was almost inaudible. What? Robert asked, putting his hand behind his ear in an exaggerated gesture. I didn't hear you. Can you repeat that louder so everyone can hear? $2,500, Mary repeated, now a bit louder but with a broken voice. 2,500, Robert exclaimed, turning to the other executives. Did you hear that? $2,500. And she has to raise a son on that. Pay rent, food, school, clothes. It's almost impossible, isn't it, Mary? She didn't answer. Tears were now flowing freely down her face. She no longer tried to hide them. Robert turned his attention back to Luke, who remained standing in the same spot, observing everything with an unreadable expression. The boy did not cry. He showed no fear. He just watched, as if he were processing every word, every gesture, every second of that scene. So, Luke, what do you say? Are you going to try, or are you going to give up before you start? Luke looked away from the businessman and turned his eyes back to the safe. He took a few more steps toward it, standing just inches away from the imposing structure. His small fingers lightly touched the cold surface of the metal. He stayed like that for a few seconds in silence, as if he were mentally conversing with the object. Then, without taking his eyes off the safe, Luke asked a question that caught everyone by surprise. Why are you offering $100 million for something you think is impossible to do? The room fell into absolute silence. The question, simple and direct, had a devastating logic. Robert blinked a few times, disarmed. Maurice and Gerald exchanged incredulous looks. No one expected that response. Robert tried to regain control of the situation, forcing a laugh that sounded fake. Well, because I am generous, of course, and because I believe in giving opportunities, even when I know they are impossible. Luke finally turned to face him. His large, dark eyes seemed much older than his 9 years. Then it's not a real opportunity, the boy said with impressive calmness. It's just a way to make us feel small, to show that you have things and we don't, to laugh at our situation. The silence that followed was deafening. Mary's eyes widened, frightened by her son's courage. She wanted to pull him away, wanted to run out of there, but her legs wouldn't obey. Robert turned red, not with shame, but with anger. No one talked to him that way, especially not a poor, barefoot child. What audacity, boy, Robert said in a low, dangerous voice. Do you think you can talk to me like that? Do you know who you are talking to? Luke did not look away. He continued staring at the businessman with a firmness that was impressive. Yes, I do. I am talking to someone who is so afraid of losing what he has that he needs to humiliate those who have nothing. Because if I actually managed to open this safe, you would have to keep your promise. And that would be a disgrace for you, wouldn't it? Robert took a step forward, but before he could respond, Luke continued talking. And when he began to speak, everyone realized that this was no longer a frightened child. It was someone who carried a story, a pain, a wisdom that shouldn't exist in someone so young. My father worked with safes, Luke said, and his voice now had a different weight. He was a security engineer. He worked for a company that installed systems like this in banks, companies, and the houses of rich people. He taught me a lot. He explained how algorithms, codes, and failures worked. He said that behind every perfect technology, there are always human errors. Mary put her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. She didn't expect Luke to talk about his father, not at that moment. Robert seemed momentarily destabilized, but tried to maintain his composure. "And where is your father now?" he asked, in a tone that tried to be harsh but came out hesitant. Luke lowered his gaze for a brief second before answering. "He's not here anymore. There was an accident at work. One of those companies that only cares about profit and not about safety. He tried to warn them about a risk, but no one wanted to listen. They said he was being dramatic. 3 days later, the system failed." The silence now was of a different kind. It was an uncomfortable, heavy silence, loaded with a truth that no one wanted to face. Maurice moved restlessly in his chair. Gerald looked away toward the window. "But before that," Luke continued, "he taught me everything he knew. He said knowledge was the only thing no one could take from me, that I should always learn, study, ask, understand how things work. And I learned." Luke turned his attention back to the safe, walking around it with slow, calculated steps. His eyes scanned every inch of the structure, as if he were reading an invisible book. "This model is a Helvetia Titanium Pro," he said suddenly, making everyone in the room lean forward. "Manufactured in Zurich, military-grade Level 6 certification, rotating encryption system based on the SHA 512 algorithm. It is truly one of the best safes in the world." Robert blinked, incredulous. How did that boy know that? "But," Luke continued, "my father always said that the biggest problem with expensive safes isn't the technology. It's the user. The people who buy safes like this are rich, powerful, used to being served. They don't want to worry about complicated passwords, about codes that change, about difficult processes. So most of the time they don't even change the factory master code." Robert felt his blood run cold. He looked quickly at Morris, who was visibly pale. The entire room seemed to have lost its air. Luke pointed to a small metallic plate on the side of the safe, almost imperceptible among the design reliefs. "Every safe has a serial number," he explained, "and on Helvetia models, the default factory code is generated from that number. It's a simple mathematical formula. You take the first 4 digits, multiply by the year of manufacture, subtract the check digit, and you have the master code." He approached the digital panel and began reciting numbers aloud slowly with surgical precision. "This safe has the serial number HS4782-2019B. So the calculation would be 4,782 times 2019 minus 11. The result is..." He paused as if calculating mentally, and then looked directly at Robert. 9,655,347. That is the default code for this safe. And unless you changed it, which I doubt, that is still the code that opens this door. The silence that followed was absolute. Robert was white as a sheet. His hands trembled slightly. He looked at the safe, then at Luke, then back at the safe. Everyone in the room held their breath. Then Luke did something no one expected. He walked away from the safe, went back to his mother, and held her hand again. "I could type that code right now and prove I'm right," he said with impressive calmness. "But I'm not going to do that." Robert blinked, confused. "Why?" "Because I don't want the $100 million. The sentence fell into the room like a bomb, or the businessmen looked at each other, not understanding. Mary looked at her son, her eyes wide and still full of tears, not comprehending what was happening. Luke took a deep breath and continued, with a voice that seemed much more mature than it should be. "I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling, because that money comes from a bad place. It comes from humiliation, from contempt, from thinking that those who have less don't deserve respect. If I accept that money, I would be agreeing to this game, and I don't agree." He squeezed his mother's hand tightly, as if he were drawing courage from her or offering courage to her. It was impossible to tell. "But I am going to make 3 requests, and if you truly are a man of your word, a serious businessman as you said, you will fulfill these requests." Robert was too stunned to answer. He just nodded his head like an automaton. "First," Luke continued, "my mother will no longer work in cleaning. She has a degree in business administration, but she never got an opportunity because they always say she doesn't have experience. You are going to give her that experience. Real position with a fair salary. Maurice let out a muffled exclamation, but Robert made a gesture for him to be quiet. Second, the company will create an educational fund for the children of the frontline employees, not just for me, but for all the children who need it. Because education is the only thing that truly changes people's lives. Gerald stood up from his chair, protesting. This is absurd. You can't... Third, Luke interrupted, raising his voice for the first time. You are going to change the code of that safe. Because right now it is vulnerable. Anyone who knows that formula can come in here and open it. And if something happens, you will only have yourself to blame for your arrogance and laziness. Luke let go of his mother's hand and took a step forward, staring Robert Sterling in the eyes. So, what's it going to be, sir? Are you going to fulfill what you promised like a man of honor, or are you going to show everyone that your words are worth nothing? Robert stood there, in shock, his heart beating uncontrollably in his chest. That moment seemed suspended in time. Everyone in the room looked at him, waiting for an answer. The humiliation he had tried to impose on the child and the mother had turned back on him in a way he could never have imagined. And it was in that silence, in that impossible moment, that Robert Sterling realized he had just been defeated by a 9-year-old boy, barefoot with torn clothes, but with a dignity he had lost decades ago. The seconds that followed felt like hours. Robert Sterling remained motionless, his face still pale, his trembling hands resting on the back of one of the armchairs. He who always had absolute control of any situation, who commanded boardrooms with unquestionable authority, who made billionaires bow their heads in his presence, was now paralyzed before a 9-year-old boy. The sensation was surreal, impossible, but at the same time undeniably real. Maurice Miller broke the silence with a nervous laugh, trying to dissolve the tension that weighed over everyone like a lead cloud. This is ridiculous, Robert. You aren't going to give in to this extortion by a child, are you? It's the limit. A kid comes in here, makes some absurd accusations based on information anyone can find on the internet, and now he wants to dictate rules? This is... Shut up, Maurice. Robert's voice came out low but loaded with an authority that admitted no challenge. Maurice swallowed hard and sat back down, murmuring something inaudible. Robert continued looking at Luke, as if he were seeing the boy for the first time. No longer as a poor, barefoot child who could be used as entertainment, but as a human being with dignity, intelligence, and courage. Robert took a deep breath, straightened his posture, and finally spoke, his voice still trembling but trying to regain some control. You have my word, Luke. Everything you asked for will be done. A murmur of protests began to spread through the room. Gerald Foster stood up abruptly from his chair, slamming his hand on the table. Robert, have you lost your mind? This will set an absurd precedent. If we let a subordinate employee dictate terms, we lose all hierarchy, the whole structure. And as for the educational fund, do you know how much that will cost? This will... I said it will be done, Gerald, Robert interrupted, raising his voice for the first time. And I don't care about precedents. This boy is... Right. He showed us something we lost a long time ago. And I will keep my word. The other businessmen fell silent, agape. They had never seen Robert like this. He had always been relentless, calculating, a man who didn't give an inch in any negotiation. Seeing that sudden change was shocking. Robert walked to his desk, picked up a pen and a notepad. He began to write with decisive movements while speaking aloud. Mary Sullivan will be transferred immediately to the Human Resources Department under the direct supervision of management. A salary compatible with an administrative function, full benefits, health insurance for her and her son. The educational fund will be created with an initial investment of $10 million managed by an independent board. And the code for this safe will be changed tomorrow morning under the supervision of a specialized technician. He finished writing, tore the sheet from the pad, and handed it to Mary, who took it with trembling hands, still unable to believe what was happening. It's all here, Robert said, in writing, with my signature. You will have a scanned copy sent to your email by the end of today with a copy to the legal department and HR. It is not an empty promise, it is a formal commitment. Mary looked at the paper, at her son, at Robert, and then the tears began to flow again. But now they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of an emotion so intense she couldn't put it into words. She knelt before Luke and hugged him tightly, sobbing softly against his shoulder. "You did this, son. You actually did this." Luke returned his mother's hug, but his eyes remained fixed on Robert. There was something in that look that the businessman couldn't decipher. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't arrogance, it was something deeper. It was as if the boy were sad for having needed to do that, sad for living in a world where that was necessary. Robert felt a strange pain in his chest, a sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. It was remorse, it was shame. It was the heavy conscience of someone who finally sees himself in the mirror and doesn't like what he sees. "You may go," he said in a hoarse voice. "Mary, you are dismissed for the rest of the day. Tomorrow report to the 15th floor Human Resources Department at 9 in the morning. Ask for Claire Madison. She will already be expecting you." Mary nodded, still hugging her son, and began to stand up. Luke, however, took one more step toward Robert before leaving. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling, for keeping your word. My father always said a man is worth as much as his word is worth. You still have a chance to be a man of value." And with those words, Luke turned and left the room hand in hand with his mother, leaving behind 6 men completely stunned, still processing what had just happened. As soon as the door closed, silence dominated the room again. Maurice was the first to speak, his voice loaded with indignation. "Do you realize what you just did, Robert? You bowed to a kid. You lost all authority. How are we going to—" "Get out," Robert interrupted, still with his back to the others. "All of you, get out now." "Robert." "But we—" "I said get out," he shouted, turning abruptly. "The room will remain closed until Monday. The meeting is adjourned. Go away." The 5 businessmen exchanged incredulous looks, but none of them dared to challenge him. One by one, they picked up their briefcases, their cell phones, their jackets, and left in silence. When the door closed for the last time, Robert was left alone in that immense room, surrounded by luxury and technology, but feeling smaller than ever. He walked to the window and looked at the city below. New York was bustling under the afternoon sun, millions of people running from one side to the other, working, fighting, surviving. And there at the top, on the 42nd floor, he had lost track of what really mattered. When did he become that? When did he start using his power to humiliate instead of build? When did money become more important than humanity? He remembered his own childhood. The son of a small shopkeeper in rural West Virginia, he grew up watching his father work from sunrise to sunset to provide food for the family. He remembered the difficulties, the bills that didn't add up at the end of the month, the patched clothes he wore to school. He remembered the shame he felt when his classmates laughed at him, when teachers treated him with condescension, when doors closed in his face because he didn't have a family. Name, didn't have contacts, didn't have anything but his own determination. It was that memory that had propelled him to climb, to fight, to build an empire. But at some point, he forgot where he came from. He forgot the pain he felt. And worse, he began to inflict that same pain on others, as if it made him stronger, more powerful, more distant from that poor boy he once was. And now, another boy, as poor as he once was, had just given him the greatest lesson of his life. Robert went back to the desk, picked up the phone, and called his personal secretary. "Daniel, I need you to do a few things urgently. First, schedule a meeting with Claire from HR for tomorrow morning before 9. Second, contact the legal department and ask them to prepare an employment contract for a new employee. Third, and this is the most important, I want you to find the best lawyers specializing in educational foundations. We are going to create something serious, something that truly makes a difference. I don't want a facade, I want results." He hung up the phone and sat in the armchair, resting his face in his hands. He was exhausted, but it wasn't a physical exhaustion. It was an exhaustion of the soul, a weight of years accumulated from wrong choices, cultivated grievances, and fed arrogance. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, in the employee locker room, Mary was sitting on a bench, still hugging Luke, still holding that piece of paper, as if it were the winning ticket to an impossible lottery. Other cleaning staff came and went, some looking with curiosity, others with indifference, none imagining what had just happened on that floor above. Rachel, a co-worker of Mary's, a woman in her 50s with grey hair and a kind smile, sat down beside her. "Are you okay, Mary? You're pale, girl. Did something happen?" Mary looked at her friend, then looked at her son, and then looked back at the paper. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. So Luke answered for her. "We just changed our lives, Ms. Rachel. My mom isn't going to work in cleaning anymore. She's going to be an administrator, and there's going to be an educational fund for the employees' children." Rachel blinked several times, trying to process the information. "What do you mean? What did you guys do?" Luke smiled for the first time that afternoon. It was a small, shy but genuine smile. "We just told the truth and demanded respect." Mary finally managed to speak, though her voice came out weak and trembling. "I don't know how, Rachel. I don't know how this happened, but it happened, and it was my son who made it happen." She hugged Luke again, this time so tightly that the boy had to ask her to loosen up a bit. Rachel kept looking at the two of them, with an expression between shock and emotion, not knowing exactly what to say. In the days that followed, news of what had happened began to spread through the corridors of Sterling Global Holdings. First, the cleaning staff found out, then the security guards, next, the receptionists, the cafeteria staff, the maintenance crew. Everyone who heard the story was incredulous, but at the same time felt a strange hope growing in their chests. If a cleaning lady could be promoted, if a boy could face a tycoon and emerge victorious, then maybe there was room for change. Maybe there was hope. The following Monday, Mary Sullivan reported to the 15th floor at exactly 9 in the morning. She was wearing the best clothes she had, a pair of black dress pants that were already worn at the edges, and a simple white blouse she had ironed 3 times to make sure it was impeccable. Her hair was tied in a bun, but this time she had applied light makeup, trying to hide the exhaustion from a sleepless night. Luke was at school finally, after classes had resumed. Claire Madison was a woman in her late 40s, with short blonde hair, glasses, and a professional posture, but a kind gaze. She received Mary with a warm smile and invited her to sit in her office. "Mary, it's a pleasure to meet you. I received direct instructions from Mr. Sterling regarding your integration into the company. He was very clear about what he expects from us." Mary was nervous, her hands sweating, her heart beating fast. She, who had spent 5 years cleaning that building, invisible to everyone, was now sitting in a management office, being treated with respect. I have a degree in business administration, Miss Claire. I graduated 10 years ago from a private college, working during the day and studying at night. But I never got an opportunity in the field. They always said I didn't have experience, so I ended up accepting the cleaning job because I needed to support my son. But I know how to work. I know spreadsheets, reports, process management. I just need a chance." Claire nodded, taking notes in a notebook. "And you will have that chance, Mary. I'll be honest with you. What happened last week affected a lot of people here, especially Mr. Sterling. He is determined to do things differently, and you will be the first of many changes to come." She stood up and took a folder from her cabinet, handing it to Mary. "This is your employment contract. Position of administrative assistant in the Human Resources Department, with the possibility of promotion after a performance review in 6 months. Initial salary of $4,000 plus full benefits. Extensive health insurance for you and Luke. Meal vouchers. Transit pass. Everything formalized." Mary took the folder with trembling hands and began to flip through the documents. Tears formed in her eyes again, but this time she didn't try to hide them. They were tears of joy, of relief, of a gratitude so deep it hurt her chest. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. "You don't need to thank me. Thank your son. He was brave when all of us adults failed to be." Claire reached out her hand, and Mary shook it firmly, sealing not just an employment contract but a new beginning. Meanwhile, on the 42nd floor, Robert Sterling was in a completely different meeting. Sitting around that same tempered glass table, but this time without cigars or whiskey, were representatives from 3 major law firms, specializing in educational law and foundations. There were also 2 financial consultants and a social worker. The educational fund you are going to create cannot be just another one of those things for show, Robert said firmly. I want something that actually works. Full scholarships for the children of employees at all levels, not just executives. From daycare to university, pedagogical monitoring, psychological support, teaching materials, everything. I want it to be a model that other companies can copy. One of the lawyers, a middle-aged man with round glasses, made some notes and then asked, Mr. Sterling, this type of structure requires a considerable investment. We are talking about at least $15 to $20 million just to start, and about $5 million annually for maintenance. Are you prepared for that commitment? Robert did not hesitate. I will invest $100 million, $50 now, and the rest over the next 5 years. And I want the name of the fund to be the Henry Sullivan Institute for Education and Opportunity. Everyone in the room looked at him, surprised. Henry Sullivan? Who was that? It was the father of the boy who made me see what I had become, Robert explained. He was a security engineer. He died in a workplace accident caused by corporate negligence. He taught his son that knowledge was the only thing no one could take from him. So this fund will bear his name, as a way to honor his memory and everything he represented. The silence that followed was one of respect. The social worker, a young woman with green eyes, cleared her throat and spoke. That is very beautiful, Mr. Sterling, but allow me to ask a question. What changed? Why this sudden decision? Robert was silent for a few seconds, looking out the window at the city below. When he finally answered, his voice had a different tone, softer, more human. Because I had forgotten what it was like to be invisible. I had forgotten the pain of being treated as if you were worth nothing. And a 9-year-old boy, barefoot and with torn clothes, reminded me of that in the most painful way possible. He showed me that I had become exactly what I hated most when I was young. And if I don't change now, I will die being remembered as an arrogant tyrant. And I don't want that, not anymore. The social worker smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her face. Then let's make it happen, Mr. Sterling. Let's create something that truly transforms lives. And so, over the following weeks, things began to change at Sterling Global Holdings. Mary adapted quickly to her new position, showing a competence that surprised even Claire. She had a keen eye for processes, could identify problems that no one else saw, and had a natural empathy that made other employees feel at ease when talking to her. In a short time, she became a fundamental piece in the human resources department. But the big change came when Claire and Mary together proposed an unprecedented project. It was a Wednesday afternoon when they entered Robert's office with a slide presentation. Mr. Sterling, Claire began, Mary and I have been talking about the educational fund, and we had an idea. Before investing all that money in scholarships for the future, how about we find out what talents we already have here inside? How many highly qualified people are working in subordinate roles simply because they never had the opportunity to show what they are capable of? Robert leaned forward, interested. Continue. Mary took the floor, still nervous but with growing determination. I propose that we hold a meeting with all the frontline employees, cleaning, security, maintenance, cafeteria, reception, everyone, and ask them to share their true stories, their backgrounds, their experiences, their hidden talents, without fear of judgment, just honesty. And then we would evaluate possibilities for internal relocation, training, promotions. It would be like an audit of wasted talent. Robert was silent for a moment, processing the proposal. Then a slow smile formed on his face. It wasn't the arrogant smile of before. It was a genuine smile of someone who finally finds a purpose. Do it. And I want to be present at that meeting. And that was how the following Friday, the auditorium on the 10th floor of Sterling Global Holdings, which was normally used only for large corporate presentations, was opened for a completely unusual meeting. About 80 frontline employees were there, sitting in the upholstered chairs, looking at each other with a mixture of confusion and curiosity. After all, they had never been called for something like this. On the stage, Mary was standing with a microphone in her hand. Beside her, sitting in a simple chair, was Robert Sterling. No imposing desk, no Elevated stage. Just 2 people face to face with 80 others. "Good morning, everyone," Mary began, her voice still trembling but determined. "My name is Mary Sullivan. Many of you know me. Until 3 weeks ago, I worked on the building's cleaning crew. I was invisible to almost everyone. But something happened that changed my life. And today, I am here to say that you are not invisible either. You exist, you matter, and we want to know your true stories." A murmur ran through the auditorium. Mary took a deep breath and continued. "How many of you here have a university degree? Can you raise your hand?" Slowly, hesitatingly, a few hands began to rise. First 5, then 10, then 20. In the end, almost half the auditorium had their hands raised. Robert's eyes widened, surprised. He truly didn't know. "How many of you speak more than one language?" More hands went up. Robert stood up from his chair, took the microphone from Mary's hands, and walked to the edge of the stage. "I want to hear, one by one. Tell your stories, please." And so it began. First it was Sebastian, one of the night shift security guards, a black man in his 45s, with an athletic build and a deep voice. Sebastian stood up slowly, as if he didn't believe this was actually happening. He walked to the microphone with measured steps, held the object with his large, calloused hands, and then looked Robert Sterling in the eyes. There was a silent dignity there, a contained strength that came from years of forced invisibility. "My name is Sebastian O'Malley. I've worked as a night security guard for 7 years, but before that I was a history professor. I graduated from Columbia University, did a specialization in African history and African American culture. I taught in public schools for 12 years, but when I turned 40, I was laid off. They said they needed to renew the staff, bring in fresh blood. I translated that in my head. I was too old, too black, too inconvenient. I sent out more than 200 resumes, no response. So I accepted the security job because I needed to eat. But I am still a teacher. It's just that no one wants to hear what I have to teach." The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with a painful truth that everyone there recognized. Robert felt his chest tighten. He made a gesture for Sebastian to continue. "And I speak 3 languages," Sebastian continued, "English, Spanish, and French. I learned them on my own, studying at night after work, because I always believed that knowledge is resistance, that no one can take from you what you know." Robert closed his eyes for a brief second. Those words echoed the same ones Luke had said about his father. It was as if there were an invisible chain connecting all those people, all those stories of wasted talent, ignored potential, and denied humanity. "Thank you, Sebastian," Robert said in a hoarse voice. "Your story will be heard, I promise." Sebastian nodded and went back to his seat. Next it was Valerie's turn, the cook from the 12th floor cafeteria. A plump woman in her 50s, with brown hair streaked with white, an always impeccable apron and a smile that hid a deep sadness. "My name is Valerie Simpson. I've worked in the kitchen for 4 years, making snacks and coffee for the employees. But I was an executive chef. I worked in high-end restaurants in Manhattan for almost 20 years. I won awards, appeared in magazines, was interviewed on television. But when my husband got sick, I needed flexible hours to take care of him. I asked for a reduced workload, offered to work part-time, but they let me go. They said a chef can't work part-time, that a kitchen requires total dedication. As if I didn't have dedication, as if my dedication to my husband were less important. He passed away 2 years ago, but I never managed to get back into gastronomy. Apparently, a 2-year break makes you irrelevant." Her voice failed at the end and she had to clear her throat before continuing. "But I still make the best pastries in this city, and the people who eat my snacks don't even know they are eating food made by someone who has prepared dinners for presidents and ambassadors." Mary was beside Robert, and she also had tears in her eyes. Every story she heard was like a stab to the heart, a brutal realization of how much talent, how much knowledge, how much life was being wasted just because the system was cruel, inflexible, and inhuman. The next to stand up was Julia, the receptionist in the main lobby. A young woman of 32 with fair skin, straight black hair and glasses. She held the microphone with trembling hands. My name is Julia Fairfield. I am a career diplomat, or rather, I was. I graduated in international relations from Georgetown, passed the State Department exams, and served in US embassies abroad for 5 years. But when I got pregnant, everything changed. Opportunities began to dry up. They transferred me to increasingly irrelevant posts. They said I could no longer travel as much, couldn't work late anymore, couldn't dedicate myself like before. As if being a mother made me less capable. Eventually, I resigned because I couldn't stand being treated like a problem anymore. I came to work here at the reception because I need a steady salary to raise my daughter alone. But I speak 5 languages. I understand diplomacy, international negotiations, protocol. And I stay here answering phones, scheduling visits, smiling at people who don't even look at my face. Robert was feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. It was anger, but not directed at anyone specific. It was anger at the system, at society, at how things were, and at the same time it was shame. Shame for being part of that system, shame for having contributed to that injustice. The meeting continued for almost 3 hours. Each story was more impactful than the last. There was the janitor who was a mechanical engineer but lost his job in the economic crisis and never managed to return to the field. There was the cleaning assistant who had 2 degrees, one in pedagogy and another in psychology, but couldn't get a job because she was already 55. There was the afternoon shift security guard who had been a systems analyst but suffered an accident that left him with mobility difficulties, and even after recovering, no tech company wanted to hire him. Each story was a punch to the stomach. Each account was living proof of how society wasted people, how it treated human beings as disposable parts, how prejudice, ageism, ableism, sexism, and racism destroyed lives and careers. When the last person finished speaking, Robert walked to the center of the stage and stood there in silence, looking at those faces. Faces he had seen 1,000 times in the corridors, at the entrances, at the exits, but had never truly seen. And now he saw. He saw everything. He saw the pain, the resilience, the strength, the dignity. "I have no words," he began with a choked voice. "I spent decades building this company, thinking I was creating something big, something important. But today I realize I was building on rotten foundations. I was perpetuating injustices. I was complicit in a system that destroys people. And I apologize, from the bottom of my heart, for being blind, for being deaf, for being part of the problem." He took a pause, took a deep breath, and continued. "But today that changes. Today, a new era begins in this company. Claire and Mary will work with each of you to find real opportunities. If you want to return to your fields of study, we will create positions. If you want to update your skills, we will pay for courses. If you need flexible hours because of your family, we will adapt. No more treating people like numbers. No more wasting talent. No more invisibility." The audience was silent for a few seconds, and then, slowly, someone began to applaud, then another, and another, until the entire auditorium was on its feet applauding. It wasn't an ovation of euphoria. It was an ovation of relief, of gratitude, of a hope that had been buried for so long and was finally being resurrected. Mary was crying openly now, and she no longer tried to hide it. Robert looked at her and felt a pang of something that could be called pride. Not the arrogant pride from before, but a genuine pride in seeing someone who had been invisible now standing there, making history, changing lives. News of the meeting spread like wildfire, first inside the company, then outside. Employees on other floors began to comment on what had happened, some with skepticism, thinking it was just another internal marketing strategy, others with genuine curiosity, and some with envy, feeling that the frontline employees were receiving unfair privileges. But none of that mattered when, 3 days later, Maurice Miller did something that would change everything. Maurice had never forgiven Robert for bowing to that boy. He saw it as weakness, as a betrayal of the principles they had always defended. And he had the perfect weapon to destroy Robert, the video. Because, of course, there was a video. That entire boardroom had security cameras recording everything 24 hours a day. And Maurice had access to those recordings. He was responsible for the building's security through one of his outsourced companies. On a Tuesday night, Maurice entered the system, downloaded the full video of the humiliation of Luke and Mary, edited it to remove only the final part where Robert fulfilled the promise, and then sent it anonymously to 3 major news portals and a dozen digital influencers with millions of followers. The video exploded. In less than 12 hours, it already had more than 20 million views. People were horrified, indignant, revolted. Seeing a 9-year-old boy being humiliated that way, seeing his mother being forced to expose her salary, seeing the businessmen laughing at the situation, was too much for the public to handle. Robert Sterling became the symbol of everything wrong with American capitalism. His photo was on every newspaper cover, in every trending topic, in every conversation. He was the villain, the monster, the cruel businessman who humiliated poor children for fun. Sterling Global Holdings' stock plummeted 23% in a single day. Clients cancelled contracts, suppliers demanded renegotiations, consumer groups organized boycotts. The board of directors called an emergency meeting. Robert was in his office when he received the call from Henry Burke, the chairman of the board. The voice on the other end was loaded with anger and despair. "Robert, explain to me what the hell this is. Do you realize the crisis you are causing? The stock has plummeted. We have investors wanting to pull out. Employees resigning. This is a catastrophe." Robert was sitting in his armchair, looking at the computer where the video was being played for the 1,000th time. He saw himself mocking Luke. He saw the barefoot boy with torn clothes. He saw Mary being humiliated, and he felt a deep nausea. "No, Henry, I saw it." "Seeing it doesn't solve anything," Henry shouted. "We need action. We need damage control. You're going to have to resign. There's no other option. You've become toxic to the company." Robert closed his eyes. Part of him wanted to fight, wanted to resist, wanted to defend himself. But another part, the part that had been transformed by a 9-year-old boy, knew that this was deserved. He had done that. He had been that monster. And now he was reaping the consequences. "I'm not going to resign," Robert said with a calmness that surprised even himself. "But I'm going to do something better. I'm going to own it." "Own it? What do you mean, own it?" "I'm going to schedule a press conference. I'm going to appear alongside Mary and Luke. I'm going to tell the whole story. I'm not going to hide. I'm going to face it." "Robert, that's professional suicide. If you appear publicly now, you'll make everything worse. Let the lawyers handle it. Let the PR team—" "No," Robert interrupted. "No more PR, no more lawyers, no more cold and calculated official statements. I did that. It was me. And I'm going to take the consequences. Schedule the press conference for tomorrow." And before Henry could protest, Robert hung up the phone. He then picked up his cell phone and called Mary. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice worried. "Mr. Sterling, I saw the video. Everyone saw it. Mary, I need your help. I need you and Luke to appear with me at a press conference tomorrow. I'm going to tell the whole story. I'm going to own up to everything I did. But I can only do that if you are with me." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Robert could hear Luke in the background asking who it was. Mary murmured something to her son and then came back to the phone. "Why should I do that? Why should I help you after everything you did?" Robert felt his throat tighten. It was a fair question. More than fair. "Because you are better than I am. Because Luke is better than I am. Because you taught me something I had forgotten. And because the whole story needs to be told. Not the edited version they are spreading, but the whole truth, including the part where I failed, but also the part where I tried to fix it. People need to know that it's possible to change, that it's possible to learn, that it's possible to redeem oneself." Another silence. "And then," Mary answered with a tired but firm voice, "I'll talk to Luke. If he agrees, we'll go, but there is one condition." "What is it?" "You are going to announce that the 100 million you offered as a joke will actually be invested in the educational fund, all of the money. And you will do it in Henry's name, Luke's father." Robert felt tears burn his eyes. He nodded even though he knew she couldn't see. "It's done. Thank you, Mary." The press conference was scheduled for 10 in the morning the next day in the main auditorium of Sterling Global Holdings. More than 200 journalists, reporters, photographers, and television cameras packed the space. News helicopters circled the building. Reporting vans blocked Park Avenue. It was the biggest media circus New York had seen in years. Robert entered the stage first. He wore a simple suit, no tie, no ostentation. He seemed to have aged 10 years in a week. Deep, dark circles under his eyes, shoulders slightly slumped, a heavy expression. Beside him, Mary and Luke entered. She wore a discreet professional outfit. He wore his school uniform and jeans. The boy held his mother's hand firmly. The silence that settled when they positioned themselves before the microphones was almost palpable. Camera flashes went off incessantly. Robert took a deep breath and began to speak, without reading any notes, without a script, just speaking from the heart. "My name is Robert Sterling. I am the man in the video you saw. I am the one who humiliated a child and his mother. I did that. And there is no excuse for what I did. There is no justification. It was cruel. It was inhuman. It was indefensible." He paused, looking directly at the cameras. "For decades, I used my power to oppress people, to mock those who had less, to feel superior. I built an empire, but I did it by stepping on those who had no way to defend themselves. And I thought I was right. I thought that was strength. But I was wrong. Terribly wrong." Tears began to stream down his face, and he didn't wipe them away. "This boy beside me, Luke Sullivan, gave me the greatest lesson of my life. He, at 9 years old, barefoot with torn clothes, showed me what dignity is, what courage is, what humanity is. He could have accepted the money I offered. He could have taken revenge, but no. He demanded justice, he demanded respect, he demanded opportunities not just for himself, but for everyone." Robert turned to Luke and Mary and did something that shocked everyone present. He knelt. There, before 200 cameras, before the whole world, the tycoon knelt before the child and the mother he had humiliated. "I apologize with all my heart for what I did, for the pain I caused, for the humiliation I imposed. You didn't deserve that. No one deserves that." Mary was crying. Luke remained serious, but his eyes shone with contained tears. The boy then did something unexpected. He reached out his hand to Robert, helping him get up from the floor. "Get up, Mr. Sterling. It's not by kneeling that you're going to fix things. It's by working. It's by changing. It's by doing things differently." The room exploded. Journalists shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But Luke wasn't finished. He took the microphone, and even though he was too small to reach it comfortably, he stood on his tiptoes and spoke with a clear, firm voice that echoed through the auditorium. "My father taught me that everyone deserves a second chance, that people can make mistakes, but they can also learn. Mr. Sterling made a mistake, a big mistake, but he is also trying to fix it, and that counts for something." Luke looked at the cameras, at the journalists, at the world that was watching. "I'm not special. My mother isn't special. We are ordinary people, but we are people, with dignity, with dreams, with value. And there are millions of people like us, working in invisible jobs, being treated as if they don't exist. And that needs to change, not just in this company, but everywhere." He pointed to Robert. "Mr. Sterling promised to invest 100 million in the educational fund in my father's name, and he will keep his word, because that's how we start to fix things, one promise at a time, one opportunity at a time, one person at a time." The journalists' questions were many. About the video, about Robert's change, about the educational fund, about the company's stock, about everything. Robert answered them all with brutal honesty. He admitted his mistakes without trying to make excuses. He spoke about the changes he was implementing, about Sebastian, Valerie, Julia, and all the other wasted talents that had been discovered. The press conference lasted nearly 2 hours. When it ended, no one knew exactly how public opinion would react. Robert had exposed himself completely. He had admitted everything. He had shown vulnerability. In a world of leaders who never admit mistakes, that was either very brave or very stupid. In the hours that followed, the internet exploded again. But this time the tone was different. There were, of course, those who said it was all theatre, that Robert was just trying to save his image. But there was also a growing wave of people who were moved by the courage to own up, by the humility to kneel, by Luke's speech. The days following the press conference were the most intense of Robert Sterling's life. The repercussions were global. The video of the press conference, with Robert kneeling and Luke talking about dignity, went even more viral than the original humiliation. Video. International news channels reported the story. Psychologists, sociologists, and human behavior experts discussed the case on TV shows, in academic articles, and on podcasts. Public reaction was divided, but something was changing. While some continued calling Robert a hypocrite and an opportunist, others saw something rare in the modern corporate world, someone publicly admitting they were wrong and truly trying to change. And that second voice was growing. Sterling Global Holdings stock, which had plummeted to a dangerous level, began to stabilize. It didn't return to the previous level immediately, but it stopped falling. Some investors who had threatened to leave decided to wait and see what would happen. And something was happening. Robert wasn't just talking, he was acting. The day after the press conference, he gathered the company's entire board of directors in a meeting room. This time, there were no cigars, whiskey, or ostentation, just coffee and water, and a clear agenda. Starting today, he announced in a firm voice, this company will operate differently. All outsourcing of essential services will be reviewed. Contracts that pay abusive wages will be renegotiated to ensure dignity for workers. Every employee, regardless of position, will have access to the same basic benefits: health insurance, meal vouchers, transit passes, no exceptions. Some directors tried to protest, talking about costs, about the impact on profits, about the need for competitiveness. Robert cut them off with a hand gesture. Profit is important, but not at any cost. If this company cannot be profitable while paying dignified wages and offering humane conditions, then it doesn't deserve to exist. It's as simple as that. It was at that moment that many of the directors realized they were no longer dealing with the Robert of old. This was a different man, transformed, and those who did not accept this transformation gradually began to leave. Maurice Miller was one of the first. He resigned from all his positions on the board and broke off commercial relations with Sterling Global Holdings. Others followed, but for every person who left, new professionals arrived. People who identified with the new philosophy, managers who believed in social responsibility, investors who prioritized impact over immediate profit. And gradually, the company began to transform from the inside out. Mary, who now held a coordination position in the Human Resources Department, led the Talent Relocation Task Force. Sebastian left night security and began coordinating a corporate education program, giving lectures and workshops on diversity and inclusion. Valerie took over the management of the cafeteria and implemented a completely new menu, bringing in concepts of sustainable and healthy gastronomy. Julia was transferred to the company's international relations department, where she could finally use her 5 languages and her diplomatic experience. Every story of transformation became news. Every relocated employee was a living example that it was possible to do things differently. And this began to inspire other companies, first in New York, then in other states, then in other countries. The Sterling Global Holdings model was becoming a reference, not for its size or profit, but for its humanity. The Henry Sullivan Institute for Education and Opportunity was officially launched 3 months after the press conference. The ceremony took place at a public school in an underprivileged neighborhood in Brooklyn, far from the luxurious halls of Park Avenue. Robert insisted on this. He wanted the launch to happen where the institute would truly make a difference. The school courtyard was packed. Hundreds of children, parents, teachers, staff, and journalists. Luke was there beside his mother, wearing his school uniform. When Robert began his speech, he didn't speak to the cameras. He spoke to the children. This institute bears the name of Henry Sullivan, a man I never met, but who changed my life through the son he raised. Henry taught Luke that knowledge is the only thing no one can take from you. And today, in his name, we are ensuring that other children have access to that knowledge. Robert pointed to a bronze plaque that was being unveiled at the school entrance, with Henry Sullivan's name engraved in large letters. This is not a favor. It is not charity, it is justice. It is the minimum a society should guarantee, that every child, regardless of where they were born, how much their parents earn, or the color of their skin, has the chance to develop their potential. And if anyone asks why a businessman is investing $100 million in this, the answer is simple: because we owe it. Because for decades we took more than we gave back, because it's time to change. The children cheered, not because they fully understood all the words, but because they felt the emotion, the sincerity, and the transformation happening there. Luke was invited to speak as well. He stepped onto the small improvised stage, took the microphone, and looked at the other children, many of whom were as poor as he had been. Some were barefoot, others had torn clothes, but all had the same large, attentive eyes he had. My father told me that we don't choose where we are born. We don't choose if we'll have money or not, but we can choose who we want to be. I chose not to accept humiliation. I chose to fight for respect, and you can choose too. You can study, you can learn, you can dream. And now with this institute you're going to have one more tool to turn those dreams into reality. The ovation was deafening. Mothers cried, teachers were moved. And Robert, who was watching from a discreet corner, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. He felt that his life had a purpose. He felt that he was finally doing something that truly mattered. Months passed. The Henry Sullivan Institute grew. It started by serving 50 children. By the end of the first year there were 200, in the second year 500. Other companies began to financially support the project. Volunteers offered to provide tutoring. Universities established partnerships to offer full scholarships to the Institute's students who reached higher education. Sterling Global Holdings also changed. The stock began to rise again, not to previous levels, but to a healthy and sustainable level. The company lost some clients who didn't identify with the new philosophy, but gained others who valued social responsibility. Profit initially decreased by about 15%, but the company was more stable, more human, and more connected to its employees. Robert also changed, not just in his speech, but in concrete actions. He reduced his own salary by 40% and redirected that amount to internal social programs. He abolished the use of the private helicopter, switching to a driver or even public transportation whenever possible. He sold 2 of the 3 mansions he owned and donated the proceeds to organizations working with education and affordable housing. But the most significant change was in that small titanium safe on the 42nd floor. Robert had kept the promise to change the code, but he didn't choose a random password. He chose something that would have meaning. Now the access code was Luke's birth date, March 12, 2016. Every time Robert needed to open that safe, he had to type that date, and every time he typed it, he remembered. He remembered the humiliation he had caused. He remembered the lesson he had received. He remembered that power without humanity is just tyranny. Inside the safe, there were no longer just corporate documents and money. There was something more valuable: letters, hundreds of them. They were letters of thanks from the first children benefited by the Institute, letters from employees who had been relocated to positions matching their qualifications, letters from mothers who could now dream of a better future for their children. Robert kept each of them as treasures, and on nights of insomnia, when doubts arose, when market pressure tightened, when voices said he was being weak, he would open that safe and read those letters, and he would remember why he was doing all of it. It was on one of those nights, 6 months after the launch of the Institute, that Robert received a different letter. It arrived by traditional mail in a simple envelope, without a return address. Inside there was a handwritten sheet of paper. The handwriting was elegant but shaky. Robert recognized who it was from even before he started reading. It was from Maurice Miller. The letter began like this: Robert, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if I should be writing, but I need to get this off my chest. I was the one who leaked the video. I was the one who betrayed you. I thought I was punishing you for bowing to that boy. I thought I was defending our values, our way of seeing the world, but I was wrong. Robert sat down slowly in the armchair, his heart racing. He continued reading. My daughter, Faith, she's 16. Last week she saw the video of the press conference in an ethics class at school. The teacher used it as an example of leadership and transformation. And when Faith got home, she confronted me. She asked me, "Dad, would you have the courage to admit your mistakes like Mr. Sterling did? Would you have the courage to kneel and apologize?" Robert felt a lump in his throat. He kept reading. I didn't know how to answer. I stayed silent. And in that silence I saw myself. I truly saw myself. And I didn't like what I saw. I realized I spent my whole life building an image of a strong, unbreakable man who never admits weakness. But what is strength, Robert? Is it humiliating children? Is it exploiting employees? Is it never admitting you were wrong? That's not strength, it's cowardice in disguise. Tears began to blur Robert's vision. He had to stop reading for a moment, wipe his eyes, and take a deep breath. I resigned from all my positions in other companies. I sold half of my shares and created a support fund for single mothers, in the name of my own mother, who raised 3 children alone and never had recognition. I'm trying, Robert, trying to be better, trying to learn from that boy who taught us so much. The letter ended with a simple but powerful sentence. Thank you for having the courage to change. You opened a door I didn't even know existed. Robert folded the letter carefully and kept it in the safe, along with the others. Maurice was also changing, and that meant the transformation was going beyond Sterling Global Holdings. It was touching hearts, changing minds, and inspiring others to question their own choices. At the end of that same year, the company conducted a full social impact audit. The numbers were impressive. The employee turnover rate had dropped 60%. Productivity had increased 25%. The organizational climate had improved dramatically. And most importantly, 120 employees had been relocated to positions more suited to their qualifications, resulting in stories of transformation that inspired all the others. Sebastian, the former security guard who now coordinated corporate education, implemented a mentoring program where high-level executives spent a day working in operational roles. Robert was the first to participate. He spent an entire day working as a cleaning assistant, cleaning bathrooms, emptying trash cans, and sweeping corridors. At the end of the day, he was exhausted. But he had learned more about the company in those 8 hours than he had learned in months of financial reports. Valerie, the former cafeteria cook, who was now the manager of the food sector, completely transformed the company's gastronomic experience. She implemented seasonal, organic, and sustainable menus. And more importantly, she created a culinary training program for other employees who wanted to learn the trade. The cafeteria, which was once just a functional place, became a space for socializing, learning, and dignity. Julia, the former diplomat receptionist, was leading the company's international expansion, bringing her experience and cultural sensitivity to negotiations that were previously handled in a coarse and insensitive manner. She, who once answered phones and scheduled visits, was now closing million-dollar contracts in 3 different languages. Each of these stories was proof that wasted talent was not just an individual loss, but a collective loss. The company was better, more human, more efficient, more connected. It was in December, almost a year after that fateful afternoon when Luke and Mary entered the boardroom, that a special meeting took place. Robert invited Mary, Luke, and the main transformation leaders of the company for dinner at his home. Not in the luxurious mansion he had sold, but in the simpler 3-bedroom apartment where he had decided to live, in a middle-class neighborhood far from the ostentation of before. The table was set with simplicity, homemade food prepared by Robert's own domestic worker, who now had a formal contract, all labor rights, and was treated with the respect she always deserved. Around the table sat people who represented the entire transformation: Mary, Luke, Sebastian, Valerie, Julia, Claire from HR, and a few more employees whose lives had changed. Robert raised a glass of juice because he had stopped drinking alcohol as part of his personal transformation and made a toast. A year ago, I was a powerful but empty man, rich but miserable. I had everything, but I was nothing. Then this boy here, he said, pointing to Luke, showed me what I had become, and he gave me the chance to change. It wasn't easy. I lost partners, I lost contracts, I lost status, but I gained something much more valuable. I gained humanity. Everyone around. The table was moved. Sebastian discreetly wiped away a tear. Valerie held Julia's hand. Mary looked at her son with a pride that was almost palpable. Luke, who was now 10 years old and a bit taller, but maintained the same attentive and deep eyes, asked to speak. Robert nodded. "My father taught me many things," the boy began in a firm voice, "but the main one was that everyone deserves dignity. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, white or black, man or woman. Everyone is a person. And people deserve respect. Mr. Sterling learned that, and he's teaching others to learn it too, and that's more important than any money, any power, anything." The table was silent for a few seconds, a respectful silence, loaded with emotion. Then Sebastian began to applaud, then Valerie, then everyone. And in the midst of that applause, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in decades. He felt that he belonged. He felt that he was part of something bigger than himself. He felt that his life had meaning. After dinner, when everyone had gone home, Robert was left alone in the living room, looking out the window at the city. New. York shone down there, millions of lights blinking in the darkness. And somewhere in that immensity, there were other Marys, other Lukes, other Sebastians, Valeries and Julias. Talented people being wasted, dignified people being humiliated, valuable people being made invisible. But now at least there was a lighthouse, there was an example, there was proof that it was possible to do things differently. And Robert knew that this was just the beginning, that the transformation didn't end there, that every day was a new choice, a new opportunity to do the right thing. He walked to the bedroom and picked up a photo he kept on the nightstand. It was the photo from the press conference, the exact moment when Luke was helping him get up from the floor. That image had become a symbol. It had been shared millions of times on social media. It had been on the covers of magazines. It had been analyzed by psychologists, sociologists, and philosophers. But for Robert, that image was just a personal reminder. A reminder that he had fallen, but that he had had the courage to get up, and that now he had the responsibility to help others get up as well. The next day, Robert arrived early at the office, as he always did now. But before starting to work, he did something that had become a ritual. He walked to the 42nd floor, entered the boardroom where it all began, and stopped in front of the titanium safe. He typed the code slowly. 3/12/2016. Luke's birth date. The door opened with a soft click, and inside, along with the letters and documents, was a small New York Yankees t-shirt, faded and worn. It was the t-shirt Luke was wearing on that fateful day. Mary had kept it and then given it to Robert as a gift, as a symbol. No money, no contract, no document in that safe was worth more than that t-shirt, because it represented everything that mattered: humility, courage, dignity, humanity. And every time Robert looked at it, he remembered that power without purpose is just vanity, and that wealth without compassion is just disguised poverty. He closed the safe carefully, straightened his suit, and went back to work. He had meetings ahead, decisions to make, problems to solve. But now he did all of it differently, with awareness, with respect, with humanity. Down in Brooklyn, Luke was entering his classroom, the same public school where the Henry Sullivan Institute had been launched. He sat at his desk, opened his notebook, and began to study. Math, his favorite subject. The teacher explained quadratic equations, and Luke absorbed everything with the same attention he had given that safe a year ago. During recess, some classmates approached. They wanted to know about the story, about the video, about the businessman. Luke always answered with patience, but never with arrogance. He explained that he hadn't done anything extraordinary. He had just demanded respect, and that anyone could do the same. One of the classmates, a boy named Peter, thin and shy, asked in a low voice, "But Luke, weren't you afraid of that rich man, of all those others laughing at you?" Luke thought for a moment before answering. "I was afraid, yes, very afraid. But my father always said that courage isn't not having fear. Courage is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. And I had to do it. For myself, for my mother, for all the people who are invisible. If I didn't do it, who would? Peter fell silent, processing the words. Then he smiled, a small but genuine smile, and nodded. He understood. And that seed of courage planted in a simple recess conversation could grow, multiply, and spread. Because that was the true transformation. It wasn't just in the 100 million invested. It wasn't just in the company that changed its policies. It was in the hearts, in the minds, in the daily choices of ordinary people who decided to do the right thing, even when it was difficult, even when they were afraid, even when the world said it wasn't worth it. The story that began with a cruel humiliation on a luxurious floor of a Park Avenue building ended up spreading through schools, companies, homes, dinner conversations, ethics classes, and family gatherings. It ended up inspiring other entrepreneurs to review their practices. It ended up encouraging other employees to demand respect. It ended up showing poor children that they had value, regardless of where they were born or how much their parents earned. And at the center of all this, three people who represented three generations, three perspectives, three forms of courage. Henry, who taught his son that knowledge is power. Luke, who used that knowledge to demand justice. And Robert, who had the humility to learn from a 9-year-old boy. Years later, when Luke graduated as an engineer with a full scholarship from the Henry Sullivan Institute, he would remember that day. That moment when he stood barefoot and with torn clothes before powerful men and chose not to bow. He chose to demand dignity. He chose to make a difference. And Robert, when he was old and looked back on his life, would not remember the billions he accumulated, the buildings he built, or the contracts he signed. He would remember the day he knelt before a child, the day he admitted he was wrong, the day he chose to change. Because in the end, what remains is not power. It is not money. It is not status. What remains is how much you touched lives, how much you made a difference, how much you were human. And that was the greatest lesson of all. A lesson that is not learned in business schools, in management books, or in leadership conferences. A lesson that is only learned when you have the courage to look at your own reflection and not like what you see. And then, have the even greater courage to change. Transformation is never easy. It is never fast, it is never perfect, but it is always possible. As long as there is courage, as long as there is humility, as long as there is a genuine will to be better. And when Robert passed away many years later, surrounded not by luxury but by people who truly cared about him, the last thing he would see would not be a titanium safe or a corporate empire. It would be the face of a 9-year-old boy, barefoot with large and deep eyes reaching out, his hand and saying, "Get up, sir. It's not by kneeling that things are fixed, it's by working, it's by changing, it's by doing things differently." And he had done it. Done things differently. Changed. Worked. Not perfectly, but honestly. And in the end, that was all that mattered.